Commander Vexthan of the Shrali Empire had survived 42 years of military service. He had fought in 3 interstellar wars. He had stared down the barrels of Koreth plasma cannons without blinking. He had once negotiated a peace treaty while bleeding from 4 limbs. None of that had prepared him for Earth. The assignment came on a quiet Tuesday morning, or what passed for a Tuesday morning on the Shrali homeworld, where the sun rose twice, and neither time was particularly welcome. Vexthan was sitting in his office, reviewing troop formations, when his superior officer, High Marshal Drevok, walked in and dropped a datapad on his desk, with the kind of smile that meant something unpleasant was coming. "You are being sent to observe the humans," Drevok said. Vexthan picked up the datapad, he read the words, he put the datapad down. "The humans," he repeated. "The Galactic Confederation wants a full military assessment. The humans have been advancing faster than any species we have ever tracked. In 200 years, they went from burning wood to launching ships into deep space. In the last 50 years, they have built a military force that now sits at the 3rd seat of the Confederation Defense Council. We need to understand them. You are our best observer." Vexthan looked at the datapad again. There was a photograph of the planet. It was mostly blue and green. It looked peaceful. He had learned over a long career that peaceful-looking things were almost always the most dangerous. "How long will this assignment take?" he asked. 3 days, Drevok said. "They are primitive. You will be bored." Those were, as Vexthan would later record in his official report, the most incorrect words ever spoken by a senior Shrali officer in the history of the Empire. He arrived at Fort Braxton Military Academy on a gray morning in October. The shuttle set down in a designated landing zone on the edge of the Academy grounds, and Vexthan stepped out onto human soil for the first time. He was 7 feet tall, gray-skinned, with 4 eyes arranged in a horizontal line, and fingers that were one too many by human standards. He was wearing his full-dress uniform, which was polished, decorated with medals, and deeply impressive by any galactic standard. The human who met him at the landing zone was a short woman in a green uniform with a clipboard. She looked at him the way a person looks at a delivery that arrived late. Not amazed, not afraid, just vaguely inconvenienced. "Commander Vexthan?" she said. "That is correct," he said. "I'm Corporal Davis. I'll be your guide for the first week. You'll be staying in the observer quarters in Building 7. Breakfast starts at 05:30. Don't be late." She turned and walked away. He stood there for a moment. No greeting ceremony. No formal welcoming address. No acknowledgement of the 42 years of service represented by his medals. Just a corporal with a clipboard who told him not to be late for breakfast. He followed her. Fort Braxton Military Academy stretched across 300 acres of what the humans called Virginia. It had buildings, training grounds, obstacle courses, a shooting range, a swimming facility, several large fields for physical exercises, and what appeared to be an enormous machine that dispensed hot, dark liquid at all hours of the day and night. Vexthan would later learn this machine was called a coffee dispenser. He would give it its own paragraph in his report. His room in Building 7 was small and clean. It had a bed, a desk, a window, and nothing else. He had been told this was standard. He set down his equipment and looked out the window. Outside, in the gray early morning light, humans were running. Not running away from something, not running towards something, just running, in long lines, in the cold, in the dark, before the sun had even finished rising. Some of them were singing while they ran. Not happy songs. More like rhythmic chanting, the kind that meant they were either preparing for battle or possibly summoning something. He checked his chronometer. It was 4:55 in the morning. He wrote his first observation in his field journal. "Humans run in the dark. Voluntarily. Investigation required." Corporal Davis collected him at 5:25 and took him to the mess hall, where cadets were already gathered in large numbers, moving through lines with metal trays and collecting food with the focused efficiency of soldiers preparing for an important operation. The food smelled strange and familiar at the same time. Vexstan had studied human cuisine before arriving. He had been told it was edible. He took what was offered and sat at the end of a long table. The cadets around him glanced at him. A few stared. One, a young male with short red hair and a nose full of freckles, leaned across the table and said, "You're the alien observer, right? Are you going to eat that egg?" Vexstan looked at the yellow object on his tray. "Possibly. If you don't want it, Hernandez will eat it. He eats everything." A cadet further down the table raised a hand without looking up from his own food. Vexstan pushed the egg toward him. The cadet took it immediately. "I am Commander Vexstan," Vexstan said to the red-haired cadet. "Cadet Walsh," the boy said, already returning to his own food. "Welcome to Braxton. Try the coffee. It'll change your life." Vexstan did not try the coffee that morning. He would try it on day 3. He would then spend 40 minutes wondering if he was dying and file a medical incident report with the Shrali embassy. The medical officer would later review the report and write back that he was fine and should perhaps try less next time. The morning continued. After breakfast, Vexstan was taken to observe the first training session of the day, which was called physical training, or PT. He stood on the side of the field with his journal and watched 200 cadets perform exercises in perfect synchronized misery. They ran. They dropped to the ground and pushed themselves up repeatedly. They held positions that looked painful for extended periods. They ran again. A drill instructor walked among them, shouting encouragement that did not sound encouraging at all. It sounded like a threat, wrapped in a shout, wrapped in another threat. What confused Vexstan most was not the exercise itself. It was the faces of the cadets. They were suffering. He could tell that clearly. Their muscles were shaking, their breathing was ragged, and several of them had expressions that suggested they were rethinking every decision they had ever made. But they did not stop. Not one of them. And some of them, impossibly, were smiling. He wrote in his journal, "Humans appear to experience something during physical pain that is not entirely negative. Further observation required. Possibly a medical condition." By the time the morning session ended and Corporal Davis came to collect him for the orientation briefing, Vexstan had already filled 6 pages of his journal. He had been on Earth for 4 hours. He sent a message to High Marshal Dravok that evening. It was short. It said, "3 days will not be sufficient. Requesting extended assignment. These creatures are not what we expected. I am not entirely sure what they are. I will report more when I understand more." He sealed the message, looked out the window at the training grounds below, where a handful of cadets were still running long after the official session had ended, and added one final line. "They are insane, but I do not think that is a weakness." By the end of his first week, Vexstan had filled 2 journals, sent 9 messages to High Marshal Dravok, and consumed by accident an entire cup of human coffee. He had not slept properly in 4 days, which he initially blamed on the mattress, before his medical scanner confirmed it was the coffee. He had also, despite himself, begun to find the humans fascinating. The coffee incident deserved its own section in his growing report, and he gave it one. On the morning of day 3, Corporal Davis had set a cup in front of him at breakfast, with the words, "You should really try this, just once." He had tried it. It was dark and bitter, and it smelled like something that should not be ingested by living creatures. He drank it anyway, because a Shrali officer did not show weakness at a breakfast table. Within 20 minutes, his hearts, he had 2, were beating at different speeds. His 4 eyes felt unusually wide. He was intensely aware of every sound in the mess hall. A cadet dropped a fork at the far end of the room, and Vexstan turned toward the sound with the speed of a soldier under attack. Cadet Walsh, sitting across from him with his usual breakfast, looked up. "First coffee?" he said. "Is this normal?" Vexstan asked. "Totally," Walsh said. Give it 20 minutes, then you'll feel great. Vexthon filed a medical report anyway. The embassy doctor wrote back within the hour. You are experiencing caffeine stimulation. Reduce intake. Do not stop entirely, or withdrawal will be worse. This information did not comfort him. He later added a full section to his official report titled, Human Stimulant Culture, a Study in Self-Inflicted Neurological Alteration. The coffee, he would eventually conclude, was deeply important to understanding human soldiers. They did not function well without it. Most cadets arrived at breakfast looking like they had been recently dragged through a tunnel, and they remained in that state until the coffee was consumed. After the coffee, something changed. Their posture improved. Their voices got louder. Their eyes focused. It was as if the drink was a key that unlocked a door that led to a room where the functioning human lived. He began to think of coffee as a military resource. He wrote, Human combat readiness is directly tied to access to a specific hot beverage. Recommend all future diplomatic encounters with humans include a coffee supply as a goodwill gesture. Withholding coffee should possibly be classified as a provocation. The second thing that occupied his notes that week was what happened during tactical training. He had expected human military training to resemble Shrali training. Shrali cadets were trained through strict hierarchy. An instructor spoke. The cadets listened. No one questioned the instructor because the instructor was senior, and being senior meant being right. This was efficient. It was clean. It had worked for 400 years. Human tactical training was nothing like this. He sat in on a class led by a Captain Morrison, a lean older man with tired eyes and a dry voice that somehow carried enormous authority. Captain Morrison was explaining an ambush strategy to a room of 30 cadets. He was maybe 3 sentences into the explanation when a cadet in the second row raised a hand. What if the terrain doesn't support the left flank position? The cadet asked. Vexthon wrote in his journal, Cadet interrupted senior officer, I am waiting for the punishment. There was no punishment. Captain Morrison stopped, considered the question, and said, Good point. What would you do instead? And then the cadet explained an alternative, and 3 other cadets argued with the alternative. And Captain Morrison stood at the front of the room, watching all of this with the expression of a man who had planned for exactly this to happen. Vexthon stared. 30 cadets were now debating the best way to stage an ambush. The noise level was well above what Vexthon considered appropriate for a learning environment. At one point 2 cadets were talking at the same time, and a third one drew a rough diagram on the nearest surface to make a point. Captain Morrison walked slowly between them, asking questions, redirecting, letting the argument run. After 15 minutes, the class had arrived at a strategy that was genuinely better than the one the captain had started with. Vexthon could see that clearly. The original plan had a gap in the second position that the cadets' collective argument had closed. He wrote, Human learning involves argument. The argument improves the outcome. This is not chaos. This is a method. I do not fully understand it, but I am trying. What he found even more confusing was what motivated human soldiers. In Shrali military culture, motivation was simple: duty, rank, and the fear of shame. These were well-understood forces that produced reliable soldiers. Vexthon had never needed to understand motivation beyond these 3 things. Humans were motivated by spite. He discovered this on the morning of day 5, during a particularly brutal PT session in the rain. The drill instructor, a compact man named Sergeant Fields, who seemed to generate his own weather system, told a cadet named Ortega that she was behind on her mile time, and that if she didn't improve by the end of the week, she would repeat the whole cycle. Ortega said nothing. She just looked at Sergeant Fields with an expression Vexthon could not read. Then she ran the next mile, faster than she had run anything all week. Afterward, Vexthon asked Cadet Walsh what had happened. She got told she couldn't do it, Walsh said, like that explained everything. And that made her run faster? Yeah. Vexthon wrote, Telling a human they cannot do a thing appears to make them do the thing faster. I have tested this observation 3 times. It holds. This is either the most useful or most dangerous motivational tool I have encountered in 4 decades of military study. He also documented, at length, the word hua. He first heard it on day 2, when a drill instructor shouted something at a line of cadets, and they all shouted hua back. Then he heard a cadet say it very quietly to himself while failing a climbing exercise, and it sounded like determination. Then 2 cadets said it to each other after finishing a run, and it sounded like celebration. Then 1 cadet said it to another cadet with a specific tone that sounded almost like an insult, and the second cadet laughed. He asked Corporal Davis what it meant. She thought about it for a while. Everything, she finally said. He spent half a page trying to define it, and eventually wrote, "Hua is a verbal unit that carries meaning based entirely on context, tone, timing, and speaker relationship. It can mean yes, understood, I agree, I am in pain, I am proud, this is hard, let's go, good job, and at least 6 other things. It cannot be directly translated into any Shrali word. I believe it is a distillation of the entire human military spirit into a single sound. I find it both confusing and impressive." On the last night of his first week, he sat at his desk and reviewed his notes. He had arrived expecting to write a 3-page assessment of a developing military species. He now had 47 pages and a growing sense that he had dramatically misjudged what he was looking at. He wrote to Drevok again, "The humans are not primitive. They are something else entirely. I am still determining what that something else is. The coffee is starting to taste normal to me. I am not sure how I feel about that." 3 weeks into his assignment, Vexthan received word that Fort Braxton was about to begin its annual Hell Week. He had read about Hell Week in the briefing materials the Confederation had prepared for him. The documents described it as a comprehensive endurance evaluation designed to test physical and mental limits. He had read this and assumed it meant something like the Shrali 3rd-tier endurance trials, which were difficult but structured and lasted precisely 72 hours. He had been wrong about many things since arriving on Earth. He added Hell Week to the list. It started on a Sunday evening with no warning. The cadets were in their barracks when the drill instructors arrived with lights and noise at 2200 hours and simply did not stop for 6 days. There was almost no sleep. There was constant cold water. There was running, obstacle courses, team exercises, problem-solving challenges, and the ever-present voice of a drill instructor narrating every failure in vivid detail. Vexthan observed from a respectful distance, wrapped in a thermal layer his Shrali biology required, drinking his now standard morning coffee, and taking notes, with all 4 eyes open wide. On day 2 of Hell Week, he saw something that stopped him mid-sentence. 2 cadets, Cadet Rourke and Cadet Mendez, had, by all accounts, been rivals since the first week of the academy. They competed for top scores in every class. They had argued loudly in at least 2 tactical sessions. Corporal Davis had told him, with the casual tone humans used when delivering important information, that they were not exactly friends. On day 2, Rourke fell during a beach run. Not a dramatic fall, just a stumble, a twisted ankle, the kind of thing that ends a week for most people. Rourke sat up in the wet sand, looked at his ankle, looked at the others running past him, and started to get up alone. Mendez, who was already 6 strides ahead, stopped, turned around, came back, grabbed Rourke by the arm. They finished the run together, Mendez carrying half of Rourke's weight across the last quarter mile, both of them silent and suffering and moving. Neither of them looked at each other afterward. Mendez just dropped Rourke's arm when they crossed the line, grabbed his own knees to recover, and that was it. Vexthan stood very still for a long time. In Shrali military culture, rivals were rivals. Competition was sacred. You did not help the person who was trying to beat you, because helping them meant weakening yourself, and weakening yourself meant losing, and losing meant shame. This was logic. This was how things worked. He wrote in his journal, a cadet helped his rival during a critical evaluation. He did not gain anything from this. He may have lost ground in his own standings, and yet he did it without hesitation and without expectation of recognition. I am trying to understand the strategic value of this, and I cannot find one. I believe the value may not be strategic. I am not sure my framework accounts for this. He asked Cadet Walsh about it that evening, over the terrible excuse for dinner that Hell Week provided. Walsh looked at him like the question was simple. You don't leave people behind, he said. Even rivals? Walsh thought about it. They're only rivals until something actually matters. Then they're just your people. Vexthan wrote 3 pages about that sentence. On day 4 of Hell Week, something happened that he had not anticipated and would spend a long time trying to explain in his report. He was standing on the edge of a field exercise, watching the cadets work through a tactical simulation, capture the flag, with point penalties and a complicated set of terrain obstacles, when the team nearest to him realized they were 1 person short. One of the cadets, a broad-shouldered young woman named Cadet Torres, looked around, spotted Vexthan standing on the sideline, and walked directly over to him. Sir, she said, without preamble, we need a 6th. Are you doing anything? Vexthan looked at her. He looked at his journal. He looked at the field. I am observing, he said. You can observe from the field. Here. She held out a yellow vest. You're on blue team. We call you Big V. He had never been given a nickname before, not once in 42 years. Shrali officers were addressed by rank and name, precisely, always. Big V was not a rank. Big V was not a name. Big V was something else entirely. He put on the yellow vest. He told himself afterward that he had done it purely for research purposes, that participating would give him a ground-level view of human tactical coordination that he could not get from the sideline. This was true, technically. It was not, entirely, the whole reason. What happened next ended up occupying 6 pages of his report, and a separate supplemental document he labeled Incident, Field Exercise, Day 4, Hell Week, Personal Notes. Blue Team with Vexthan as their 6th, won the exercise. He would not take credit for this entirely. The cadets were good. Torres was a natural tactician. Rourke, ankle-wrapped and limping, was still the fastest reader of terrain on the team. But Vexthan had 4 eyes, which meant he could watch 4 directions at once, and at the critical moment, when Red Team was moving to take the flag, he had seen them coming from an angle no human eye had caught. He said, Movement, 11 o'clock, 4 of them. And Blue Team had responded without questioning how he knew, without stopping to debate, just moved, adapted, and held the position. Blue Team won by 12 points. The cadets were loud about it. There was shouting and backslapping, and someone threw their helmet in the air. Torres grabbed Vexthan's arm and shook it, which was a human gesture of celebration he had read about, but had not expected to be the recipient of. Rourke pointed at him and said, Big V came through, in a tone that carried more weight than the words themselves. Vexthan stood in the middle of the celebration and felt something strange happening in his chest. His medical scanner registered an elevated heart rate, a mild elevation in body temperature, and a chemical signature it labeled as positive social bonding response. He had felt this before once, after leading his unit through a particularly hard campaign, and bringing all of them home. He had thought it was a rare thing, a thing that took years and blood and shared history to produce. It had taken 4 days and a yellow vest. That night he wrote in his journal, not his official journal, but the smaller one he kept for himself. I did not expect to feel like part of something here. I have been an observer. Observers are separate. Observers watch. Today I did not observe. I was inside it. I think I understand something now that I could not have understood from the sideline. I am not sure this is good for my objectivity. I am not sure I care. He sent his weekly report to Dravok. It was 40 pages long. Dravok wrote back, Are you still on Earth? Vexthan wrote back, "Yes, I am on a team. They call me Big V." In his 5th week at Fort Braxton, Vexthan attended a leadership seminar and had what he would later describe, in careful official language, as a significant reassessment of foundational assumptions. In his private journal, he described it differently. He wrote, "I think we have been doing this wrong for 400 years." The seminar was held in a plain room, with chairs arranged in a circle, which was already strange. Shrawly military seminars had rows facing forward, because information moved in one direction, from the person who knew things to the people who did not. A circle suggested something else. A circle suggested the information might move differently. The instructor was a Major Chen, a quiet woman who spoke carefully and listened more than she talked. She began the session with a question she did not answer herself. She asked, "What is the job of a leader?" Cadets offered answers. To command, to make decisions, to maintain order, to achieve the mission. Major Chen nodded at each one and wrote them on the board without reading them. Then a cadet in the back said, "To take care of the people under you." Major Chen underlined that one. The entire next hour was built on that idea. She talked about something called servant leadership, which was a concept that Vexthan had to write down phonetically, because his translator kept trying to render it as leadership of servants, which was not the same thing at all. She talked about how the best officers were not the ones who demanded the most from their people, but the ones who removed the obstacles in their people's way. She talked about a principle so simple that Vexthan almost missed how radical it was. A good officer eats last. Not metaphorically, literally. In the field, the officer eats after the last soldier has eaten, because the officer's job is the welfare of the unit, and eating last is how you show that you understand that. Vexthan sat very still. He thought about the Shrawly command structure, where rank determined access to everything, resources, food, quarters, comfort, in strict order, from highest to lowest. He thought about 42 years of officers who ate first and troops who ate whatever was left. He thought about the Confederation's military record over the last 200 years, and how many campaigns had been won and how many had been lost, and what the difference between them had been. He raised his hand. In 42 years, he had not raised his hand in a seminar. Senior officers did not raise hands. They spoke when they chose to speak. Major Chen called on him. "If the leader takes the worst position consistently," Vexthan said, slowly, "the leader builds trust. And if the soldiers trust the leader, they follow more completely. And complete following produces better outcomes." He paused. "This is not kindness, this is strategy." Major Chen smiled at him. "That's one way to see it. Is there another way?" "Some people do it because it's the right thing to do," she said. "The strategy is a side effect." He wrote 4 pages about this after the seminar. He sent a separate note to Drevok that said only, "Please send me all records of leadership outcomes across the last 4 centuries. I have a question about something." Drevok wrote back asking if he was all right. He wrote back that he was fine and that he needed the records. The second significant event of that week was his encounter with Master Sergeant Kowalski. He had heard about Kowalski from every cadet he had spoken to. They mentioned her the way soldiers mention weather, not as something to be evaluated, just as something that existed and had to be prepared for. She had been at Fort Braxton for 22 years. She was 5 feet and 9 inches tall, which was not large by human standards, and was notably small by Shrawly ones. She had gray hair cut short, and eyes that Cadet Walsh had once described as the color of a problem. Vexthan had assumed these were the normal exaggerations of young soldiers who had not yet met genuinely frightening people. He met her on a Wednesday morning. She was crossing the training ground when Corporal Davis pointed her out, and Kowalski changed direction and walked directly toward him without slowing down. She looked up at his 7-foot height with no visible reaction. "Commander Vexthan," she said. Her voice was exactly the right volume, not loud, not quiet, just at the exact frequency that made you feel like whatever you were doing, you should stop and pay attention. "Master Sergeant," he said, "I hear you ran the field exercise with Blue Team last week." "I did." "You called a Red Team approach at 11 o'clock before any of the cadets spotted it." "My biology permits wider visual coverage," he said. She looked at him for a long moment. He had his threat assessment instinct, which every Shirali had, running quietly in the background at all times. It was the part of his mind that evaluated danger and assigned it a level. In 42 years of active service, including 3 wars and multiple hostile encounters, it had never gone above a 4. Standing in front of Master Sergeant Kowalski, it quietly registered a 6. She was 5 feet 9. She was unarmed. She was standing still. He wrote later, "I do not fully understand what Master Sergeant Kowalski is. I only know that my body understood something my mind was still working out. She is not large. She does not posture. She simply exists at a level that communicates very quietly that she has handled worse than you, and she will handle you too, if necessary." I have 3 paragraphs of notes on her voice alone. The third thing that stayed with him that week was a conversation he was not meant to hear. He was walking back to Building 7, late on Thursday night, later than usual, when he passed the open window of a ground-floor barracks room. He was not listening deliberately, but the voices carried in the still night air, and he slowed without deciding to. Several cadets were talking. The lights were low, and the voices were tired. Someone asked why they had all joined. The answers came slowly, the way honest answers do when people are too tired to perform. One said family, that he was 3rd-generation military and couldn't imagine anything else. One said she had grown up near a base, and the structure had been the first thing in her life that felt safe. One said he'd been failing out of everything else, and this was the one thing that held him. And one, whose voice Vexton did not recognize, said very quietly, "I didn't have anywhere else to go. But now I'm here, and I think maybe I was supposed to end up here." No one said anything for a moment. Then another voice said, "Same," and someone laughed softly, and the conversation moved on. Vexton stood outside in the dark for a long time. In the Shirali military, soldiers were selected. They were tested at birth for physical and cognitive markers. The best were trained. The rest were not. It was efficient. It produced a consistent soldier. There was no room in the system for someone who had nowhere else to go. He thought about the cadets he had watched all these weeks, their varied shapes and histories, their different reasons and different fears, and different kinds of determination. He thought about how messy it all was, how unstructured, how impossible to calculate or predict. He thought about how Blue Team had won. He wrote in his private journal that night, "We select for the soldier we want. They'd take whoever shows up and make soldiers out of them. I used to think our way was better. I am no longer certain. The soldier who chose this, who had to fight to get here, who had nothing else, that soldier has something in them that selection cannot produce. I do not have a word for it yet." The final report took Vextan 11 days to write. This was unusual. His previous reports, assessments of Korath defense lines, analyses of Veldrani naval formations, full evaluations of 3 separate alien military systems, had each taken between 4 and 7 days. But those reports had been about things he understood. The thing he was writing about now was something he was still, even after 6 weeks, only beginning to understand. He sat at his desk in Building 7, with his journals arranged beside him. 6 full journals, 2 half-full ones, and the small private one he kept in his inner pocket. He had a fresh cup of coffee. He had stopped filing medical reports about the coffee after the first week. He had stopped noticing the taste after the third. Now he simply needed it in the morning, the same way the cadets did, and that fact appeared in his report, as footnote number 14. He wrote the report formally, as required, addressed to the Galactic Confederation High Council, and copied to High Marshal Dravok and the Shirali Imperial Military Review Board. He used proper headings and structured language, and all the conventions of official assessment. And then, inside that structure, He said exactly what he had found. He wrote about the physical capabilities first, because that was where the council expected him to start. Human physical endurance was high. Their pain tolerance was, by Shrawly standards, medically improbable. He had watched cadets complete exercises that his own physiology would have refused after the first hour. He wrote, "Human pain tolerance is not a flaw in their biology. It is a feature. They are aware of it. They are proud of it. They train specifically to increase it. This means that any calculation of human military endurance based on what their bodies should logically be able to sustain will be incorrect. Assume more. Always assume more." He wrote about the singing. This had confused him deeply in the first week, and had not become less strange over time. But he had come to understand its function. Human soldiers sang during training. They sang in rhythm, in unison, and the singing was tied to the physical effort, matching the cadence of running or marching, turning exertion into something collective. He had measured the outputs. Units that sang during long runs covered more distance and reported lower perceived difficulty than units running in silence. He wrote, "They have discovered that music converts individual suffering into shared experience. Shared experience builds unit cohesion. Unit cohesion improves performance. They have been using this technique for thousands of years. I recommend the Shrawly Military Review Board investigate whether our silence protocols are actually optimal." He wrote about morale, which was the concept that had given him the most difficulty. Morale had no physical source he could identify. It was not food, or rest, or equipment quality, or any measurable input. It was something that existed between soldiers, generated by shared hardship and small kindnesses and moments of humor in dark situations. It rose and fell in ways that did not always track with objective conditions. A unit could be exhausted, cold, and losing, and their morale could still be high because of one joke someone made, or one person who kept moving when everyone else wanted to stop. He had watched a cadet spend 40 minutes making the worst puns he had ever heard in any language, while his whole team was waist-deep in cold water during a Hell Week exercise. The team had been miserable. They had also been laughing. They had finished the exercise. He wrote, "Human morale functions as a force multiplier with no consistent external source. It can be generated by a single individual, transmitted to a group, and sustained past the point of physical reason. It is, as far as I can measure, the single most tactically significant factor in human military performance. It cannot be bombed, starved, or calculated away. I do not know how to advise the Council to account for it. I only know that any plan which does not account for it will fail." He wrote about the dangerous ones next. Every military assessment included a threat analysis, and Vexthan had spent considerable time thinking about which humans were most dangerous. He had arrived expecting the answer to be the largest, most decorated, most physically imposing. He had been wrong. The most dangerous humans were the ones who smiled the most. Not because the smiling meant anything specific, but because, in his observation, the cadets who smiled most easily during the hardest moments were the ones who had found a way to be genuinely comfortable inside difficulty. They were not pretending the difficulty was not there. They were simply not threatened by it. And a soldier who was not threatened by difficulty was a soldier who kept thinking clearly when others stopped. Cadet Rourke had been smiling when he ran the last quarter mile of Hell Week on a wrapped ankle with Mendez's help. Cadet Torres had been smiling when she handed Vexthan a yellow vest and called him Big V. Master Sergeant Kowalski had smiled exactly once during a training exercise, and 3 drill instructors had all noticed and straightened up without being told to. He wrote, "The most dangerous human soldiers are, almost without exception, the ones who appear to be enjoying themselves. This is not recklessness. This is mastery. Exercise caution around anyone who smiles while suffering." Then he came to the section of the report that he had been thinking about for weeks, the actual recommendation, the answer to the question the Council had sent him to answer. Should the Galactic Confederation be concerned about human military capability? He wrote it plainly. Do not engage humanity militarily. Not because they are technologically superior. They are not yet. Not because their numbers are overwhelming. They are not. Do not engage them because of what happens when you get close to them. In 6 weeks, I have watched human cadets turn rivals into allies, turn shared suffering into loyalty, and turn strangers into something that functions like family. I have watched them take a 7-foot alien observer and hand him a yellow vest and call him Big V and mean it. I have watched them build in days the kind of unit cohesion that the Shrawly military trains for years to produce. If you send soldiers to fight humans, the humans will talk to your soldiers. They will work alongside them. They will make them coffee and tell them jokes and carry them when they fall. And your soldiers will not know what to do with this, because no one has prepared them for it. The Korath attack 3 decades ago failed, not because of weapons or tactics. 2 of the Korath officers who were captured asked to stay on Earth afterward. This was classified. I found it in the historical record. I believe it is relevant. Recommend: diplomatic engagement, cultural exchange programs, possibly a military liaison role. Under no circumstances attempt to exploit human sentiment as a weakness. It is not a weakness. It is the architecture of everything else they are. He attached 48 pages of supporting observations, 6 diagrams, 2 appendices, and footnote number 67, which read, "This observer has also requested a permanent exchange posting for continued research. The reasons are professional and documented above. There is also a cadet named Rourke, who has his graduation in 11 weeks, and this observer would like to see if he makes it." The report was stamped, sealed, and transmitted to the Confederation High Council. It was classified at level Omega within 48 hours, which was the highest classification level available, and was typically reserved for information the Council considered either extremely sensitive or extremely uncomfortable. In a small footnote appended by the Council's Records Office, it was noted that 3 previous alien observers sent to evaluate Earth's military before Vexthan had also submitted requests for extended posting. One was currently embedded with a forward operating unit in Montana. One had retired and was living in New Zealand. One was, reportedly, a drill instructor at an academy in Nebraska, and had been for the past 6 years. Vexthan received his approval for extended posting on a Thursday morning. He was sitting in the mess hall drinking coffee when Corporal Davis slid the message across the table to him. He read it, he put it in his pocket. Cadet Walsh, sitting across from him as usual, looked up. "Good news?" "I am staying," Vexthan said. Walsh nodded, already returning to his breakfast. "Figured. You want that egg?" Vexthan looked at the egg. He took it himself this time. Outside the mess hall windows, cadets were already running in the gray morning light, their voices rising in a rhythmic chant that carried across the field and through the glass and into a room where a 7-foot gray alien with 4 eyes sat eating a human egg and felt, in a way he had not expected and could not entirely explain, exactly where he was supposed to be.